April 16th, 2015. This is the Ochelli Effect. I'm your host, Chuck Ochelli. Kind of not a very creative name for the show, but it is what it is. Anyway, one day past the great day of heist, the great feast, as it were, for the big animal on the majority of us, the deadline for you to kick up to your actual controlled criminals. Okay. See, the mob has a system of dues, too. It works. It works kind of well. But sometimes you pay the government anyway. This is not what we're going to talk about tonight. Not at all. Actually, I brought on a guy who has been on a few of my shows now, one solo and two of the JFK Myth shows, although tonight we're not going to focus on JFK. We're actually going to look at two other areas of interest that this gentleman has. His name is Carmine Savastano, and he happens to share two other areas of interest with me as well when it comes to historical research, and that has something to do with, at least at its root, the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and, of course, Robert Francis Kennedy, respectively. These things were sort of outshoots off, branches off, whatever it is you want to call it, of my original investigations into the JFK assassination. You wind up having to look at these other things for control and contrast, and also to put basically the entire historical era of the 1960s into context. Therefore, you know, they are sort of interesting pieces of the puzzle. I do believe that Malcolm X is also one of those areas that needs a lot more study, and it is under-reported and under-researched. But nothing gets the attention like the JFK conspiracy. Nothing gets the attention, you know, like the JFK event, because, you know, the mainstream media will continuously try and ram Lee Harvey Oswald down everybody's throat as the big bad boogeyman there. But, of course, there were interesting lone nuts in each of these cases as well. So, from Neapolis Media Group, and also my friend. And I got to tell you, I'm tempted to mimic that scene in the Rocky movies when Rocky goes, "Hey, Father Carmine! Father Carmine!" Now,
Father Carmine or Reverend War, one or the other.
Yeah, there you go. So, it's okay though. It's okay, but that's just me making a joke. But in all seriousness, man, this is definitely two of those areas that I do believe require study in order to understand the entire climate, the entire, you know, government complicity, and a whole lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into that tonight, aren't we?
Indeed we are. I agree. I think that it's an evolution, if you look at them, in my opinion, of each of the cases, they get, in my opinion, worse. As if you can imagine that, they get worse as they go on, and the same patterns develop.
Well, and now I'm going to do to you what was done to me last night on another network, because I love when they do this to me, and I'm sure you have an answer. Of course, we didn't rehearse any of this. None of this is scripted as usual, but
Nope.
Here we go. Why does this even matter, Carmine? This stuff happened almost 50 years ago, both of them, because both of them occurred in 1968. Why does this even matter, Carmine? That was the first thing that came out of somebody's mouth when they just looked me up on the internet and said, oh, he's a JFK guy. So the host brought it up where I was a guest somewhere else and said, why does this even matter anymore?
Well, to paraphrase and use a different subject from a famous comedian, if the Kennedy cases don't matter, then why are we still talking about Shakespeare and Julius Caesar?
Ah.
We talk about history because it's important. Because if you don't learn from history, you repeat it.
Or as, Mark Twain said, Samuel Clemens, as Mark Twain said, history may not always repeat itself, but it sort of rhymes. Again, paraphrasing, and these things kind of rhyme, don't they?
Yes. And I think it's also, what I try to do is, in the final chapter of my book, I try to, once it will be released this year, I promise, but I try to link them all together and show where I don't think it's just these assassinations. I think we can tie in the wars that are peripheral to them, and it's an overreaching of executive power that grows with every decade.
Well, yeah, and also the increase of law enforcement's overreach as well, because when you start to study this stuff, you wind up encountering the programs that destroyed the Black Panthers. You wind up encountering the infiltration of the Ku Klux Klan. You wind up and definitely if this was done today, it wouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, the new Black Panthers are not exactly the formidable organization they once were, and I argue they don't have the same roots either.
At this point, most grassroots organizations are hard pressed to not have somebody that is telling someone something about their activity.
Right. I mean, everybody, we live in a snitch society anyway, so nothing is done in secret. That's why when people say to me, why do you even bother with Facebook? They're monitoring you. I say, yeah, that's exactly the reason why, because I'm more than happy. Let them come. Let them come, let them see, let them read, let them spend their time, let them run me through every one of their, programs or analytical, systems, whatever they want to do, let them do it.
Yeah, you got to love Google Analytics.
Even that, yes, which is funny. But look, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with RFK or do you want to start with MLK? And notice how it's, it boils down to these, their initials again, just like JFK.
Yeah, I would imagine, if it's okay, I'd like to go in order, because I've got a description of COINTELPRO, then I've got a description of what a citizen, a different person than King had to endure, King had to endure all that and more. Then I have some FOIA requested documents that were denied up until they were released. And then I have 2 RFK documents.
And also, in as much as the ARRB released a lot of the stuff from the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the mid-'70s, a lot of the King documents are still being withheld. A whole lot of the documentation, I mean, the majority of it, to my knowledge, at least last look.
Oh yeah, a large portion of that, and even what wasn't destroyed, and the same thing with the RFK, where even more evidence was destroyed. That was probably the most grievous attack on the evidence in all 3 of the cases. I mean, JFK, there's a lot of evidence that got destroyed, but it was over time. The RFK evidence got destroyed by the people investigating, supposedly.
Yeah, immediately. I mean, I had Scott Enyard on here to discuss that, and what happened to his photographs and everything else. And I know some people disagree with Mr. Enyard and what it means, but in my mind, these photographs would have answered a hell of a lot of questions if we had them in hand.
Yeah, we just got lucky that the Brzezinski tape survived.
That's true. That is very, very true. But let's begin from the beginning and take them in order exactly.
Okay.
Martin Luther King Jr., of course, everybody knows who he was. He was an American clergyman and civil rights leader. who was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on Thursday, April 4th, 1968. He was 39 years old. Okay, he was pronounced dead at St. Joseph's Hospital, all right, at 7:05 p.m. that evening. Okay, now, this is pretty much undisputed. Okay, he was obviously an African-American civil rights leader. We all know the I Have a Dream speech. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, which nowadays I don't take very seriously, but at the time, pretty extreme for a clergyman who had only organized some individuals for their rights in America. Of most note anyway. Now, James Earl Ray, okay, a fugitive from the Missouri State Penitentiary, was arrested on June 8th, 1968, in London at Heathrow Airport. Okay, he was extradited to the United States and charged with the crime on March 10th, 1968. Ray entered a plea of guilty and was sentenced to 99 years in the Tennessee State Penitentiary. Ray later made many attempts to withdraw his guilty plea, and see Judge Joe Brown and what happened there when that whole situation actually came to a head, more recently in the 90s, okay, and tried to get a trial by jury, but was unsuccessful. He died in prison on April 23rd, 1998, at the age of 70. Now, we all know also, if you listen to me, if you've ever listened to me discuss the King case, I always bring up the wrongful death lawsuit in 1999, where the King family and a gentleman by the name of William Pepper, who was involved in a lot of interesting legal maneuvering in all, everything from architects and engineers for 9/11, excuse me, to various civil rights and government cover-up cases worldwide William Pepper is involved in. But let's see. Lloyd Jowers was the subject, and this becomes extremely controversial. Okay. They filed that wrongful death lawsuit against Jowers directly. Okay. And during the course of that case being heard in a Memphis court, which you can get the transcripts of now, excuse me again, you can find that evidence was presented which shows government complicity or possible participation in the assassination, along with Mr. Jowers and other individuals of the local underworld. Okay, so the conspiratorial case having been built, the wrongful death lawsuit was won against Mr. Jowers, and that evidence is now a matter of public record. Now, I'm not stating that I support every single bit of the evidence in that case, but it is rather intriguing. Now, yes. I've given a complete summary of everything possible that mainstream could have possibly reported to you, and I've given you some commentary. So, in your book, which you are working on now, which is called Two Princes and a King, okay, about both the princes, essentially, which would be the Kennedys, the Kennedy brothers that we know so well, RFK and JFK, and of course the king being Martin Luther King, so a sort of double meaning to that one, because also he was kind of seen as a bit of royalty in this country among certain segments of the population and all that. Extremely pivotal figure in civil rights history, and you could ascribe the word king to him in a lot of ways, but of course it also happened to be his last name. So, clever title for the book, because after all, Camelot and all these other things, it evokes a whole lot of the different bits and pieces of the imagery which has been given out over the years. Now, where shall we begin with the King assassination?
Well, in this, it's almost the reverse of what I just said before. How about the end? The conclusions of the House Select Committee and some of their ideas about what the investigation, how it was conducted.
And you do know, I know as well, because I laugh about this every time it's stated, because, people who think that there was a conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King Jr., we're supposed to be the fringe nuts.
Exactly.
But official government conclusion by the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1979 was what?
Well, the committee believes, on the basis of the circumstantial evidence available to it, much like the circumstantial evidence that was available in the JFK case, that there is a likelihood that James Earl Ray assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King as a result of a conspiracy.
Now, isn't that fascinating? Because after all, James Earl Ray has been portrayed as the lone nut who was trying to collect a bounty on Dr. King, who was just a desperate criminal, which completely makes no sense to me, because a desperate criminal who escaped from prison would be a whole lot more occupied with trying to find himself some sort of lucrative way to stay under the radar. And I think putting a bullet in the head of one of the most famous people in the world might be counterintuitive to his own, self-preservation.
Well, yeah, and then that opens up the entire background questions for where he got the money for all of his activities.
And isn't that odd? Because this guy, who again is a fugitive, okay, an escapee from a prison, somehow finds a way to do what?
He's able to buy multiple identifications. He's able to take dancing lessons. He's able to take a locksmith class. He's able to buy cars. He's able to rent hotel rooms. He's able to undertake a lot of activities that require funding an escaped prisoner doesn't have, because you can't have legitimate employment. And if you're going to have a passably decent fake ID, I would imagine that might take some help as well.
Mm-hmm. And interesting how those IDs, seem to correlate to other things, and how well made they were and everything else. I mean, this wasn't like an amateur operation, which, his criminal history, which you can obtain for yourself if you like through public records, doesn't really show this sort of profound, like, intellectual way of dealing with things. Sophistication is the word I was looking for. He wasn't an extremely sophisticated criminal, was he, Carmine?
No, a sophisticant isn't what I'd call him. He and Oswald both shot themselves once in their lifetime.
Yeah, that is true. Oswald, yeah, if you check through his military records, you can find that at one point he was actually punished for shooting himself with a weapon.
Indeed. That was his first court-martial.
Which I always find funny when people try to, ascribe this expert, marksman, great, almost James Bond. If you read certain people's stories, a James Bond-like quality seems to emerge from some of the stories of those who declare him innocent. He's almost like a super spy, if you listen, because he's working with every government agency imaginable. He's able to infiltrate groups and do all kinds of things without leaving paper trails everywhere. An amazing individual Oswald is in their fairy tales. But yeah. I guess I could be a dragon if you wrote a children's book, couldn't I, Carmine?
Yeah, I'm sorry that they have these beliefs, and then on the other side, we have people consistently saying that he was either a madman or he was, very qualified to use firearms, but he has absolutely no firing practice whatsoever. Maybe he was the only assassin to use a long-range rifle ever because he shot himself with a pistol, so he was afraid of those.
Well, that might explain why he left his pistol at the rooming house instead of bringing it with him. Anyway, again, I don't want to digress into JFK.
Okay, I just love that they both shot themselves, and these are the geniuses they're trying to put at the head of these things.
No, it's great, because there's all sorts of correlation between the cases, not just the House Select Committee's investigations, both coming to similar conclusions. And now I got a dog barking who won't stop. You guys can probably hear that. But the thing is, it is awfully fascinating how we seem to have almost, a transposition of the same kind of counterintuitive storyline. But anyway, back to James Earl Ray, and, well, he wasn't a very capable criminal, but hey, maybe he got lucky. Carmine, what do you think of that?
Once again, I don't believe in that much luck. It's like coincidences. How many coincidences must crop up until we start to think that perhaps it's not all just coincidence?
Now, although I don't necessarily trust everything that is in official hands, let's take a look at some official documents. You have a few about this case, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we went over the conspiracy. Now, there's more to the description, I think, that'll help us with how the HSCA itself termed the Department of Justice and the FBI's investigations. Mm-hmm. Now, they said the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation performed with varying degrees of competency and legality in the fulfillment of their duties. Now, that's a very nice way of saying that they broke the law and were incompetent at times.
Well, for me, that's an extremely interesting way to say there is a variety of stuff done wrong here.
Exactly.
There is a challenge to the possibilities of legality, so people's rights could have been violated.
Oh, and they were, repeatedly.
Due process was violated. You have
obstruction of justice, suppression of evidence.
even witness statements. I mean, if you go back to the Stevens affair,
If he was even sober enough to have given a statement when
it,
they supposedly...
right, if he was sober enough to have given the statement, Charles Stevens allegedly is the individual who saw James Earl Ray leaving the bathroom where he made this virtually impossible shot. Thank you very much again.
He's the Howard Brennan of the King case.
Yes, he is, except this guy's drunk instead of needing a pair of glasses. Yeah, Charles Stevens, look him up. He's the witness, and try and follow exactly how he could have witnessed what he witnessed, considering that a cabbie drops him off and he can't even walk, shortly before. But, hey, again, I'm one of these conspiracy nuts, Carmine. So,
yeah, they also might want to check the police officer who interviewed him, who also said he was drunk.
Right. Way after the incident occurred, even the police officer knew this guy was intoxicated.
Yep.
So, reliable witness. Thank you. All right.
So they elaborate. The Department of Justice failed to supervise adequately the Domestic Intelligence Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In addition, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the Domestic Intelligence Division's COINTELPRO campaign against Dr. King grossly abused and exceeded its legal authority and failed to consider the possibility that actions threatening bodily harm to Dr. King might be encouraged by the program.
Well, we all know about the wonderful, okay, I'm not going to say we all know because I always assume that the listener's not aware, but of course, over the years, what has been bandied about is this note which was sent to Dr. King explaining that that all of his, dalliances and his shortcomings as a human being would be exposed to the world, and he'd be shown to be, I believe the phrase was, the animal that he is in this note. And this is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Among other things, yes.
Among other things, and also encouraging him to kill himself before his character is assassinated in public, basically. Again, I'm paraphrasing the letter, but is that not about the gist of it?
Oh, yes. Well, they also, William Sullivan, who is the assistant director of the FBI, had suggested another gentleman to take Dr. King's place as sort of the FBI's plant at the lead of the civil rights movement.
And do you know the name of that gentleman?
Samuel Pierce.
Samuel Pierce. Because, after all, the FBI doesn't spend its time infiltrating groups that happen to be deemed subversive or anything like that, do they?
Yeah, just like the CIA.
Well, anyway, moving on to the documentation, because I don't want to hold you up too much on it. Let's get to some more interesting evidence where the government is actually showing part of its dirty hand on this.
The Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation performed a thorough investigation into the responsibility of James Earl Ray for the assassination of Dr. King and conducted a thorough fugitive investigation, but failed to investigate adequately the possibility of conspiracy in the assassination. The Federal Bureau of Investigation manifested a lack of concern for the constitutional rights in the manner in which it conducted parts of its investigation.
And what is that from?
Still from the HSCA conclusions. It's from an admin folder. So these were the first drafts of what they were going to announce, like the final drafts, I should say, before they were made public.
Right. Right. So this is the actual conclusions of a government agency. I mean, this is where, occasionally a fox goes, "Hey, look, I'm a fox. Yeah, I'm in the hen house and I'm a fox."
Yeah, we were wrong. It was a conspiracy.
Yeah. But real quietly, because you notice, if you ever watch any of these, History Channel presentations or documentaries or whatever, it's like, well, many people conclude that there was a conspiracy, but that's silliness. It was James Earl Ray,
yeah,
all by himself. Of course, the government admitting right there in that particular passage that they had not adequately investigated that possibility even. And isn't that one of the things you always look for if you're a detective of any kind? Is who is involved? Okay, we've got somebody we know is involved. Was anybody else involved?
Yeah. No, I just think it was a matter of Hoover wasn't looking.
Right.
Hoover didn't want anyone to look. Kind of like with JFK. Kind of like with RFK.
Right. Just get me that Gimberling report, and even though I've got him shooting from the wrong floor, even according to what they figured out later, let's go with it.
Yep, we don't have a real trajectory. We never actually did all the measurements. Let's just line it up with where we think the guy was and say that that's the thing.
Right. Anyway.
It happens again and again in the King case as well. The bullet. The FBI claimed that the bullet couldn't be identified because it was too mutilated. They identified it the next day privately, but it took months and years for everyone else to find out.
Well, not only that, but the reason why I mentioned Joe Brown is because if you remember when Ray's appeal was sitting there, when he was asking for the jury trial, and that consideration was on the desk of Judge Battle passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
They were supposed to honor it.
so they were supposed to automatically grant him a new trial. So Joe Brown, being the guy who inherited this case, and quite honestly, if you ever listen to any of the public pronouncements from Joe Brown, now you can find tape of this man saying, you know what, I didn't really have much use for Dr. King anyway. I didn't believe in nonviolence. I think it's a completely ridiculous form of resistance to the problems that we were having at that time, and I'm not supportive of Dr. King and really had no love for the man anyway. This man was trying to be, an honest jurist at that time, and he said, "Well, let's take the weapon that they say is the weapon, and let's begin again, and try and investigate whether this thing matches up ballistically," which Joe Brown is actually. In some ways, I mean, you could use him as an expert witness if you know a little bit about his background when it comes to being a gunsmith. Okay. And he wanted to clean the rifle because they had stated that it was too dirty to be tested and that it was too old and everything else. And he just wanted to try. And of course, again, I invite everybody to investigate exactly that fiasco and how that went down. I'm not saying, again, that I'm a big fan of Joe Brown, but yeah, I'm talking about the Joe Brown who was on TV and also wound up in a whole lot of trouble later and everything else. But even so, take a look at what he was doing in that case and judge it for yourself and see how they shut down and, anything that could resemble a new or unique revelation that could possibly be run through the public record. Okay.
The only good thing I see from them shutting down Judge Joe Brown was that they forced the King family's hand to have to do the wrongful death suit.
Right, they did. And as we said, James Earl Ray was dying at that point and in need of a liver transplant if he was going to survive. That was it. They just let him die in prison. End of story. And but it did force Dexter King and as I said before, William Pepper to go forward with that case. So there you go. There's the silver lining in that particular cloud.
Yeah, and I mean, if people want to look at it as things stand currently, and I am one of the few that contends things will change as more evidence is introduced. Mm-hmm. It's basically, if you were counting 2-1. Right now, the official stance on one of these cases is for conspiracy. Mm-hmm. So the official stance for JFK and RFK, I know they want to believe that it's Oswald and Sirhan, but as the evidence comes out, that can change as well, and other suits can be launched as well.
Well, right. I mean, uniquely, though, in the JFK case, there are actually 2 official government conclusions which are considered equally valid, which is,
you're right. Yeah, because I suppose that's a wash then. So RFK is really the only one that breaks for the government currently.
Yeah, at the moment, that's what happens, and, well, we're going to get into that shortly. But back to the documentation on the King assassination.
Okay, so I think we've captured what the HSCA's thoughts were fairly well.
Their conclusions, absolutely.
Oh, their conclusions. Mm-hmm. So now I want to move on to, this is just, I want people to understand that it wasn't just Dr. King. Dr. King endured a lot more than the average person had to endure as far as COINTELPRO. But COINTELPRO tactics existed for a long time, before and after Dr. King's death.
Right, and this would be considered like business as usual for a guy like J. Edgar Hoover, who has plenty of buildings named after him and things like that, and, the guy who revolutionized the Federal Bureau of Investigation and all of that good stuff, right? And, God help us with that Leo DiCaprio movie. But anyway.
Yeah, well, they always want to make them seem better than they really were.
Well, let's talk about what COINTELPRO was.
Well, COINTELPRO was basically the FBI's answer to evading the law. What Hoover would do is, for the Department of Justice, and, when he was under Robert Kennedy, and then every other attorney general he was under, he would just not tell them what he was doing. He would run off-the-books operations, kind of like the CIA, and would do unauthorized surveillance, intimidation, influencing family members, letter-writing campaigns, hate mail, things like that.
Right, all sorts of influence being exerted by an individual who is supposed to be charged with investigation of federal crimes. Meanwhile, he's basically committing crimes and by extension actually influencing the the public zeitgeist in one way or another by exerting these ill-gotten powers. And people contended that RFK, well, he just hated him because he was a little snot, and that may be true, but his contempt for everybody that seemed to be holding any sort of public office, and anybody who had anything to say that disagreed with his particular brand of morality, whatever that may or may not be, this is who was targeted. And again we see it. And I argue that the seeds for a lot of the surveillance state that we have today were really planted by Mr. Hoover in the first place.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I definitely think Hoover had a huge influence on the government wanting to know more than it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
Just the intrusion into personal privacy that we see today with PRISM, with all sorts of programs that have been revealed where they have been spying on the American public. And if anyone listening really believes in us maintaining our privacy, I would ask them to go online. I believe it's June 15th is when the Patriot Act is supposed to expire, all the worst of its provisions. I would recommend, I have done this, write to your congressman and let them know that you want that expiration to occur. You do not want the Patriot Act as it is. We don't want the Patriot Act at all, but if we have to endure it, then we should endure as little of it as possible.
Well, right, but you and I both know that probably sometime in the middle of the night they will push that through, and it'll just continue to exist very quietly. I have not.
All we can do is note what they're doing.
Yeah.
What else can we do
at this point in time? Yeah. So I'm very sure that that's a sort of a fait accompli when it comes to the Patriot Act. But I would definitely love to see that abolished quickly, along with the NDAA and all this other insanity. But anyway.
I know sorry, I keep going back to the future and then.
Yeah, well, we have to though, because you know what? This answers the question really, much more intensely than the idea about studying history and you don't want to repeat it. We can show you through this lens, okay, without being solipsistic in any particular fashion. We can show you through this lens that this is relevant because this is where
it all started.
It all started, exactly. So, and it's also something to consider for anybody who tries to speak up in dissent today. Because, of course, it intensified a great deal once King started, and I make this argument, and some people do disagree with me, but I make the argument that it seriously intensified when it came to Dr. King immediately after his public pronouncements regarding the Vietnam War. If he was just handling garbage man strikes and buses and things, he was an annoyance. But if he was going to also turn that, that aggregation of power against the Vietnam War, and he was going to move a mass of people against it even harder than what we were dealing with in 1968 already, then he was truly dangerous.
Well, yeah, I think that definitely going against Vietnam was the final straw for those that opposed him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what largely laid the groundwork that led up for that was the Civil Rights Act, then the Voting Rights Act, because then they were afraid he could pass laws. He could effectively use nonviolence to influence the conscience of the country to get things done.
Plus, they had not seen something like that gathering in Washington, D.C., in quite some time.
Yeah, and never from minorities.
And
never minority-led, with white people supporting and people of all colors and origins supporting.
Right. It was a serious shockwave for them because they never expected that sort of resistance to come from at least that portion of the population. When people
were angry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. When people discuss Jim Crow laws and why it was, sort of allowed to continue. Well, you know what? There was a portion of the population that you didn't have to worry about. There was a lot of poor people that were not going to get angry enough to stand up and say anything for fear of having their heads bashed in the second that they lifted their chins.
Mm-hmm.
And once that started to get lifted, there you go.
Yeah.
You now have a whole other group of subversives, a whole lot more dangerous than the alleged Red Scare, a whole lot more dangerous than the supposed Nazi movements that they were clamping down on every once in a while. You had a serious disenfranchised group of people who not only had reason to be angry, but it also now achieved some results regarding injustice in this country.
Yeah, and they had justice on their side. That's the one thing officials couldn't claim. They couldn't claim the high ground.
Right.
So
It wasn't like they were demanding something new, really. They were actually demanding recognition of what already existed. And there is the problem. Look, your document says this is the way it should be. Why isn't it?
yeah.
And there you are.
And I think that goes on today still. And I know that I have friends that aren't happy about the comparison, but if you look at the rights of gay and lesbian people, they too should be able to have the same enfranchisement as everyone else. They too should be able to have all the same legal rights as everyone else, and in some states they don't.
Mm. Yeah, that is an odd issue. Because the special protection is not necessary, but equal protection.
Exactly. I disagree with anyone getting special rights.
Right.
I don't think anyone should have special rights. But if we're going to be equal, then we all have to have the same. What I like to say to people is, let's be honest. We're never all going to be equal in real life. In real life, we all have different skills. We all have different flaws. We're never going to be exactly perfectly equal. But under the law, we're supposed to be.
Right. Absolutely. So there you go. And I take flack for a lot of the things I have to say when it comes to that subject. So,
Yeah.
but it is what it is, man.
Yeah,
exactly. I believe that even those who want to be idiots have the right to be idiots.
Yeah. It's unfortunately something we have to deal with because we live in a free society.
Right. A friend of mine used to make a joke all the time that if it wasn't for bicycle helmets and Velcro shoes, a lot of other people wouldn't be so dangerous as they are in society. But and I think he's right, because a lot of these guys would have just sorted themselves out of the mix, but for the safety initiatives. Anyway. So, all right, joking aside and everything else, I know you got some other interesting documents on the King assassination as well.
Okay, so here was this is the one I just want to give everybody, as you were saying, about a lens into it. I want to give everybody a lens into what could happen just to a person that could be suspected of being communist tied. Because in the next document I'm going to discuss right after this, the FBI and the Department of Justice are trying to make allusions similar to the John Birch Society did, that the civil rights movement had communist influences.
Oh, right. This was the murmur for a long time from officials that essentially this was a communist plot to destroy American society, to cause disturbances so that we would be fighting with each other. It was the great communist plot. And they were causing these people to dissent, but again, kind of counterintuitive, considering that if they're supposed to be American citizens and they're entitled to certain rights, and, I am a man, what can I say? These guys wearing those signs, they weren't asking for, special stuff.
No,
they wanted
for what they're supposed to have under the Constitution.
There you go. So that's all there is to that. But please go ahead and explain what else could be done if you were, suddenly painted with that pink or red brush, in official circles. Go ahead.
Okay. The subject is Richard Cyril Frank. Authority was granted to place S.A. Joseph R. Corcoran in contact with the subject under conditions outlined in Re Airtel. Keep Bureau advised of all pertinent developments. They discuss that Frank and his wife, Susan, are security index subjects of the New York office. They are suspected of being Chinese communist couriers, and they are suspected of being possible Chinese communist intelligence representatives in London. They appear to prefer a life of luxury. They talk about clothing purchases. They talk about personal accessories for the most expensive stores in New York. They talk about that he is drinking heavily and appears to be depressed and frequently at odds with his wife, which reveals heavy surveillance.
Yeah, right. Because if you have all these details, right down to the brand name labels on their clothes and everything else, pretty interesting. And who was this gentleman?
His name was Richard Cyril Frank. He was he worked in political circles, and they thought that he was an intelligence representative, but they think he was actually serving the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. And what is the reality behind this guy exactly?
Well, that's undetermined. All I've been able to find on him was the FBI files and one that said that he was just an attaché. So I can't put a final judgment on him, but in another part of the document, they talk about how he believed he was disillusioned with communism, so they might have been trying to get information out of him, maybe get him to switch.
Interesting. And of course, this is a guy, the reason why I asked you who this guy was is because here's a guy you never even heard of.
Yeah, just another person who is suspected. And you know what? He could have been. But he is just one of many, and most that were suspected were never proven to have any real connection, much like Lee Harvey Oswald, to the communists.
Yeah, right. You know, you can't find communist membership, you can't find communist friends, you can't find, you find him defecting to Russia, oddly enough. But that, to me, just shows sort of a disenchantment with, you know, his life in general in America is all that is. And going to the most extreme, as many young people do, because remember, you know, he was what, 21, I think, when he did that, or 20 years old? I think it was 20, right?
20 or 19. He might have even been 19.
Oh, 19 even. Jeez, I thought, you know, I thought he was 20. But
yeah. I don't know the exact date, but yeah, he was young. He was not an adult under the law yet.
Yeah, either way, if we give him the range from 19 to 21, I mean, tell me what the big difference is, except on your 21st birthday nowadays you can drink. Okay?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, back then he was an adult because at 18 you could drink. I think they raised that later when I got older.
Yeah, exactly. They did that for us. They sure did.
But, yeah, so basically they stuck a lens into this man's life and his wife's life and just dissected it. And they talked about the weaknesses that could be exerted, and it's the same thing that they did to King with all the other things we discussed, you know, the suicide notes, trying to replace him with a loyal servant so that they could call upon whenever they wanted.
Right, trying to infiltrate into his groups, interfering with the people that were volunteering to protect him.
Communist.
You know, labeling him a communist, trying to say that he was part of an international plot to basically destroy America, which, you know, if you listen to any of King's rhetoric and you understand any of the stuff that he was saying privately, actually not anti-American at all.
No, he loved America because it was giving him at least the opportunity to fight for what he wanted.
Right.
But he also condemned him. You know, it's the old saying. It was by a Secretary of War, Carl, I can't remember his last name, I think it was Schurz. But he said, "My country right or wrong." And that's usually the only part people remember. But the whole saying goes, "My country right or wrong, if right, to be kept right, if wrong, to be set right." You know, love for your country is not just loving it no matter what it does. It's also loving it enough to say you're wrong and you need to fix this.
Right, and those who do stand up in dissent quite often are actually the people who are working for the better. You know, they want to bring about the great ideals of the country. It's not a matter of dissent equals, you know, anti-American. You know, the harsh, you know, sort of, I don't know, psychology that emerged post 9/11. You know, if you said anything against this country, you're unpatriotic, you're anti-American, you're, you know, and all of that is an illusion. It's a fiction. Dissent is built into this country. It's part of the reality that we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to remain vigilant. We're supposed to dissent when needed. We're supposed to speak out.
Yeah, we're supposed to be skeptical.
And be skeptical. Well, you know, skepticism, God help us all, it's about as dead as critical thought. But anyway, once again, going back into the files, because I know I keep diverting, but you see how this stuff, I think
it has deeper meanings that are worth talking about.
Right. I'm hammering the fact that people say to me all the time, "Why do you talk about this stuff? You're talking about ancient history. It's all these years ago." When I was growing up, it wasn't that many years ago. And you know what? It's all relevant, and it's still, in my opinion, still happening. They don't put as many bullets in as many prominent figures' heads anymore because that raises eyebrows. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But people can be disgraced. People can have files come out on them. People can be It doesn't even have to be real. I mean, look at the Swift boat ads with Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even have to be the truth. If you repeat it enough without someone challenging it, it can become the truth.
That's it. That's absolutely it. So, but back to the files. To keep
Meanwhile, let us get down off the soapbox and go back to the files.
Yeah, let's take a look at, again, the government's own evidence.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why I use it. People question me, you can't trust it. Well, yes, you can, because there's so much they couldn't have altered it all, not even a majority. But if you're going to disprove what they claim, you have to use their own weapons against them.
Well, it is one of the preferred techniques because, as you said, they could not have sanitized everything. It was not possible. And even here's a better case. If you say, well, it's minimizing it, you're trusting them. Listen, if this is what they have in their hands, and I'll give you the point that they destroy, obfuscate in one way or another every single piece of pertinent evidence, I'll give you that point. Here's the thing, though. If this is what they still have in their hands and this is what they've allowed to come out, how bad do you think the real nuances of that reality actually are?
Oh, yeah. And most of the stuff that's already released, no one's read it all. No one.
Yeah, I know that, too.
Yeah. So whenever I hear someone say they have, I laugh because it's not true. Because if they've read it all, then they'd probably have some real heavy answers to lay on us.
Yeah, exactly. And the just in the JFK Records Collection Act, there's more than 5 million pieces of information to look at there.
Yeah.
So good luck.
Exactly.
And
I told you I was happy to have even gone beyond 100,000. And that was I haven't read line by line all of those, but I've gotten the important gold that I could find out of them.
Right.
I've probably read completely, like I told you, I think it was probably about 10,000 from front to back, ranging from 1 to 5,000 pages.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I'm just one person. I'll never get through all. No one person will ever get through all of them. But hopefully, if I can get through enough, and you can get through enough, and other people that we know can get through enough, then we can put the pieces together.
Yeah, well, that's the point. And I don't expect anybody that I've known who's researched any of this stuff, even if they dedicate most of their lives to it, I still have never heard a single person who said, in all honesty and with the greatest intent, that they have actually read every file. Nobody has.
No one has.
No.
No one alive.
No one alive, that's for sure. I mean, you could have done it in maybe 1970, when it was available.
Or right after the commission came out and all there was the report. Then you could have done it.
Yeah, that's doable. But even then, you had to read 27 books, just to get the public information done. And then there was FOIA requests and everything else, so you had additional documents. But you might have been able to accomplish that, say, by 1970, 71, 72. But once the House Select Committee emerged, once all the other minor investigations, took place, once some actual journalism took place, which led us in a whole bunch of other directions, once a whole lot of other stuff happened, I defy anybody to actually be able to honestly say they've read it all.
Oh, yeah. No, I think at best what we can hope for, what I've tried to accomplish thus far and what I'm going to keep working on for years, I'm sure, is a greatest hits.
Yeah.
The finest of the evidence.
So back to the MLK greatest hits, because we're almost through the first hour, believe it or not.
Okay. So we'll now that you have that view of what could happen to a normal citizen, I'm going to go into some of the things. These were classified top secret, and they were exempt until, I believe, the ARRB.
Okay, well, it could have been the ARRB, or it was the 25-year mark where there was limited declassifications in the King case, but nobody ever heard about that. There was no public fanfare for it. Mm-hmm. One or the other is probably true when it comes to these documents.
Yeah. This it's all just it starts with on a memo, and it says, in July, Attorney General Kennedy received a memo from the director reporting a request from Senator Maroney for information concerning racial agitation and communist influence in racial matters. The senator's request was prompted by testimony by Governor Ross Bartlett of Mississippi against an administration public accommodations bill. Mm-hmm.
And take a look at Governor Ross and his interaction with JFK, if you want, to get a flavor for who this guy was. There's recordings of that. available at the Kennedy Library if you are so inclined to go try and find them, and you can get a serious idea of who this guy was. But go ahead.
So this led to 2 days later, Governor Wallace of Alabama having a problem with it as well.
Of course, the more famous case.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was that? Oh no, Old Mrs. Mississippi.
Yeah.
But
Wallace was, yeah, Alabama.
Right. Also got shot.
Yep.
When he was running, and of course, interesting guy as well. And if you don't know who George Wallace was, if you're doing your internet search, look for the white George Wallace, not the black George Wallace that'll come up in an internet search, because he was a comedian. Okay.
Now, this is when, in this document, this portion of the document, is when the FBI convinced RFK to let them start surveilling King. Now, Hoover was already doing it since the 50s. This was just to get the official seal of approval on amping up what he was already doing.
Right.
Because it says, on July 16th, the Attorney General Kennedy apparently initiated a discussion with FBI liaison Courtney Evans concerning the feasibility of electronic surveillance on Dr. King because of possible communist influences on King.
Right.
So Hoover maneuvered RFK into this, basically. And that's what I think people need to understand, is that everything RFK did, and sometimes it was counter to his own interests and JFK's interests, he did as the Attorney General, but you have to understand that Hoover was maneuvering the entire time, and so was the CIA.
Well, not only that, but you can talk to people at DOJ who were there at the time, Bobby was the Attorney General, and you can find people that basically state that the attitude taken by, the DOJ as a whole was that, Hoover's not going to come up with what he's looking for anyway. So, okay, let him have some limited surveillance. But as you stated, he was already well involved in that since the 1950s, long before RFK became Attorney General in 1961,
Mm-hmm.
So, he's asking for permission for what he's already done. It's the kid eating a cookie out of the cookie jar and saying, "Can I have a cookie?"
Yeah.
That's pretty much what happened there.
Well, I think that also explains what you were saying. Just about the vast difference in age and experience is, I think, something that definitely fueled the hatred between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because RFK was in a sense a mental golden boy. He was well educated, he was intelligent, he spoke well, he could represent himself correctly in public, and Hoover was more into the shadows. He was there for the big engagements just to get some fanfare, but he really wasn't a well-liked or, very sociable person.
Well, right. And Bobby, of course, and look, in defense of J. Edgar Hoover, did I just utter that phrase? I did. In defense of J. Edgar Hoover, you won't hear this come out of my mouth. Yeah. You won't hear this come out of my mouth very often. But in defense of him, Bobby was not experienced, really, was not really qualified in the typical sense to be the Attorney General at the time. It's almost understandable. It was clearly a matter of nepotism as well, that he was put into that position. But, tell me about a president who didn't put somebody in some position at some point, important or unimportant, simply because they wanted somebody that they trusted there. And who else would the president trust but his own brother? Bottom line, but then again, a little bit of that resentment, maybe part of it justified, and
yeah, no, I think that it was also the age issue.
Yeah.
Now, Hoover was busting people before Bobby was born.
Exactly. So, but back to it, there you go, there's your evidence, and of course, this begins to lead us toward RFK. Is there anything else that you think is a serious silver bullet point here for the MLK?
Well, there's just a few, they have different messages that were sent back and forth to the Bureau about King when they were spying on him.
Do you get you get these from the telexes, from the cables?
Yeah, they have. There's those, and the Weisberg collection at Hood College also has some of these.
Yes, he did have quite the collection of documentation, Harold Weisberg.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead if you want to.
So it says In August 1963, the Domestic Intelligence Division of the FBI, headed by William Sullivan, once again, the one who wanted to replace King with Samuel Pierce, prepared a memorandum analyzing the Communist Party's efforts to exploit the Negroes. The memorandum concluded that the effort was largely unsuccessful but should be closely watched. It stated the Communist Party regarded King as the most likely vehicle through which it could achieve its goals. Which is not true, which we do not have. I mean, yes, there were communists that were involved in the civil rights movement, but there's communists involved in all sorts of movements. That doesn't mean that they're going to be able to take over the movement.
Oh, right. And again, it just was him still feeding on the old boogeyman of the Red Scare, the great communist takeover. Really, it was just him adapting the old agenda to try and deal with the new agenda, and this was pervasive throughout the Bureau. So let me ask you to conclude something about this, though.
Okay.
After you've gotten a flavor for all this stuff, you see what the surveillance was like, you see what the investigation was like, you see what the evidence is against James Earl Ray, and I'm sure you've taken a look at all this stuff in depth, as have I, without me influencing your conclusion in any way, shape, or form. I mean, what do you actually conclude regarding the MLK assassination?
Well, I definitely would contend it as a conspiracy, and I think that we have sufficient evidence if one looks at it, and we have a legal trial on our side. We have the official government conclusions on our side. It varies what exactly was responsible. I don't necessarily agree with William Pepper. He made some mistakes, like we all do. Like I said, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes, but we have to be willing to correct them. And I don't think that there is a definitive case laid down for military intelligence being responsible. There was military intelligence present. I think that that's definitely suspicious. But if we can't lay our hands on them, then we can't blame them.
Right, but what is clear, and here I probably differ with you very mildly, but here's what we can agree on. After a fairly in-depth study of the evidence, without going in with the preconceived notion, you can examine it, from a level playing field and say to yourself, I think, in my opinion, again, that the idea that the lone nut shooter is responsible is so full of holes, again, that it leads you to believe that something else happened. This is a guarantee. Now, there may be another lone nut, but the case against James Earl Ray falls apart. I allow for the possibility that there is a lone nut and that people were just all over him for surveillance possibilities. Okay, but...
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has to do with the initial investigators that were there. And in this case, it wasn't as long as the DPD was given to mess things up, but the MPD, the Memphis Police Department in this case, was very similar. They lost evidence. The thing that always got me about this was how it's kind of like this is another similarity between Ray and Oswald. Oswald, we know the official timeline where he is supposed to have gotten from the 6th floor out of the building and on his way in 3 minutes. Well, with Ray, it's even worse because Ray has, I think, 4 minutes, but no one even sees him. He just vanishes. He vanishes in front of 40 people, a bunch of cops, and police cars in the area. He gets to his car and escapes. And then someone makes a fake call on the radio system describing a white Mustang, the same car Ray's driving, and misleads police. What was that, just random coincidence?
Well, not only that, but of course, personal effects of his, which were easily identified as his, are conveniently dropped
down the street
in a public area right in front of a toy store, I think it was.
Literally off Main Street.
Yeah, like right off of Main Street, in a doorway, just left there, wrapped in a blanket. All this kind of evidence to prove that this guy had to have been there. To prove that all this other stuff, and it's just like, once again, we have an interesting suggestion, and a very valid suggestion in my mind, that evidence may have been planted, evidence has been destroyed, evidence has been misled, and even his legal team, James Earl Ray, is questionable.
Oh yeah, no, Percy Foreman was every one of his attorneys, starting with, I think they were less questionable as time went on, but they still all made questionable decisions. The worst was his first one, who got him to admit to the Arthur Haynes, who got him to admit to the guilty plea.
Right. Right.
Because he was hoping that it would get him some sort of leniency, which was ridiculous.
Yeah, there was no way in hell that was going to happen, and and I do believe James Earl Ray when he essentially says that he did not understand the entire proceeding the way it was going. I think he was misinformed and ill-informed in general.
Well, that happens a lot, and he was paid by the money, and that's another thing is they all had monetary interests. It wasn't about getting Ray off; it was about getting his rights to the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then him contributing from prison and promising him he'd get more after a certain amount of money was made.
Right. Right.
Now, if he would have been innocent, they wouldn't have got any of that money. There would have been no book.
Yeah. So there you go. Talk about a conflict of interest off the bat. But it's replete with all this stuff. So, essentially, I allow for something closer to the government's conclusion, maybe. The government's original conclusions about this and the alleged, bandying about of the conclusions, say, in general media, despite the fact that, of course, the HSCA concluded that it was highly, highly likely that this was a matter of conspiracy. I allow for the possibility that there could have been a conspiracy of one. But...
I'm always got my mind open that we could be wrong and new evidence will come out that will dismiss some of what we consider now to be correct.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but the likelihood, and if I had to, lay my chips on a particular number at this point, I would call it a conspiracy, and I would either lean toward no involvement with James Earl Ray or, the snack for the wolves that were waiting for their meat.
Exactly, the patsy, another patsy.
You got it, another I was trying to avoid using that phrase because I wanted you to do it.
Yeah, or how about another lone gunman? I call them the 3 lone gunmen. This is the second lone gunman.
Right. And that moves us right on into, because what happened, like you said, in order, Bobby Kennedy even announced Dr. King's assassination while he was on, making public appearances out there, to a crowd, which, that piece of film has been shown many times on many public airwaves, so we're well aware of that, okay?
Yeah. He was credited for saving Indianapolis.
Yeah, credited for keeping Indianapolis from burning that night, because it did spark a great deal of civil unrest.
Anyway, my dad told me about Detroit when the tanks had to be called.
Yeah, well, and Newark was a mess, and lots of places in New York and New Jersey became extremely hostile ground.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know those stories from when I was a kid being told about, only a few years ago, this is what happened.
So would you like to do the RFK intro, and then I'm going to try, it's going to be another, these 2 documents are, once again, I'm trying to bring more arcane things. You can give the general stuff, and I'll try to go into maybe something they haven't heard. That's
what I figure we'll do here. Like I said before, I kind of discussed this in total with Scott Enyart, but really because he was a witness to history. But also the idea that, the evidence that he could have possibly provided, I think would have been extremely valuable. And, I leave it to your own judgment as to whether it would have been or would not have been. I mean, we could have had a completely out of focus set of frames there once again. But, I
have an idea about that. It's not very popular, but I'd be willing to tell you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I think that they could have been useful, and they could have had what Mr. Enyart thinks might have been on them. But unfortunately, as soon as they went into official hands, it's over.
Yep.
The chain of custody, which is funny because when you give it to officials, it's supposed to be the chain of custody, but, you can't be sure of what they're going to give back to you.
Right. Again, counterintuitive. And I had Enyart saying on this show several times, look, I was a true believer. I thought I was doing the right thing by handing these things over to the Los Angeles Police Department. But we know how that turned out, don't we?
Yep.
Anyway, so here we go. The assassination of Robert Francis Kennedy, also known as Bobby or RFK, all right? He was a sitting United States Senator, and the brother, of course, of assassinated President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The F's don't mean the same thing in their initials, just so you know. Okay. It took place shortly after midnight on June 5th, 1968 in Los Angeles, California, during the campaign season for the United States presidential election of 1968. Okay. He had won, primaries in California. He had won in South Dakota, and was on his way to Chicago, I think. I think that was the famous statement. I could be wrong there. I haven't watched that footage in quite a while. But he was on his way there to another primary, and he was shot as he walked through the pantry of a kitchen at the Ambassador Hotel, which is a structure that no longer exists, by the way, and taken to the Good Samaritan Hospital. 26 hours later, he was pronounced dead there. Sirhan Bashir Sirhan, who at the time was 24 years old, a Palestinian/Jordanian immigrant, was convicted of Kennedy's murder and is still serving the sentence for the crime to this day. Sirhan's lawyers have released statements claiming evidence that he was framed. The shooting was recorded on audio tape by a freelance newspaper reporter. That's what we were making reference to, by the way, earlier. And the aftermath was captured on film. A lot of people believe that the film footage shows the actual assassination. That's because they haven't watched it closely. You only see Kennedy laying on the ground. You don't actually see the shots or anything else really of value pertaining to the event itself. Excuse me for coughing again. Okay. Kennedy's body laid in repose at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York for 2 days before a funeral mass was held on June 8th. His body was interred near his brother at Arlington Cemetery. Okay.
Interesting story about that if you want to know later.
Oh, sure. As with his brother John's death, the Kennedy's assassinations and the circumstances surrounding it have spawned a variety of conspiracy theories. And this is directly the statement from Wikipedia. Not the most, it's a concise reference point, but questionable in my opinion. Anyway, back to it. As of 2015, Kennedy remains one of the only two sitting United States senators to be assassinated. Of course, the other one was Huey Long. Okay. And that is sitting United States senators to have been actually assassinated by someone directly murdered while they were in office, because he was the senator from New York at the time he was running for president. Okay. That's the basic proclamation of the events and the facts and the allegations afterwards from your general mainstream kind of sources. Now, Special Unit Senator was established, and this is from my mouth now, I'm not reading from Wikipedia. Special Unit Senator was a specialized group which was put together within the Los Angeles Police Department in order to investigate this. The sort of war cry from the individuals who were behind it and involved in it was they would not have another Dallas. Okay? Because they had seen what happened on the national scene to the Dallas Police Department and how they were vilified for not handling things properly. And boy, by 1968, they hadn't seen a thing yet. Okay? Because now we have their documentation and we can trace the ineptitude, the ridiculousness, and the holes all throughout the alleged official investigation. Both of these crimes, by the way, not federal offenses. They were supposed to be examined and investigated by the local authorities. That was their jurisdiction to do so. And in this case, the organization, the Los Angeles Police Department, which I consider the exemplar for police corruption and, inaction, deviation from reality, and in fact, one of the worst abusive organizations, police organizations, I should say, in the United States consistently over the years, is the LAPD. That's my editorial comment. Okay. But what do we know about the RFK assassination besides the fact that they were initially going to include it in the House Select Committee on Assassinations and then decided not to? What do we actually know about RFK and the things that were going on and Sirhan, and I don't know if we want to get into hypnosis and all those other possibilities, but let's leave that aside. Let's leave the theories to the theorists. And let's talk about the hard evidence that actually exists.
Okay, well, the first document I thought was rather fitting because it was written on and marked for April 16th, 1968.
Hmm.
This is something that occurred. Basically, it is from the Director of Central Intelligence to the Deputy Director of Plans on the tentative plans of Senator Robert Kennedy to visit West Berlin on May 1st. Now, this is one of many documents that can be found which reveals that the CIA and the FBI were constantly watching Robert Kennedy and what
Hmm.
he was doing, as they were watching Dr. King and what he was doing.
Right. And of course, people will say that, look, he was a United States Senator. There were many possibilities for his approach, misdeeds possibly on his part, because after all those Kennedys were playboy deviants and everything like that. All of them actually independently wealthy from birth, these guys that we're talking about that were, publicly murdered. But, so they didn't actually require the jobs they were taking and all that other good stuff. I always have to say that. I don't deify these people,
Yeah,
but credit where credit's due, man. A millionaire who doesn't need the job is taking on the job, the frustration, the aggravation, and the resistance from a great many good old boy networks that really did not want them to be part of the equation,
yeah.
both his brother and himself. And Bobby, asking for even more trouble, tries to,
Take
take
out
up,
the mafia.
yeah, take out the mafia. Despite the protests of J. Edgar Hoover, tries to actually cause a lot of interesting things to happen domestically in this country, and was again another guy who was quite willing to make statements against the U.S. incursions into Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So, another dangerous guy who can wield public power and public opinion to one degree or another and incite not only, his supporters weren't all Ivy League white people. Mm-mm. Plenty of them were quite diverse. So this was a guy who had the ability to influence a great many people in the population and could become increasingly dangerous the higher the office he held. And here we go.
And
So,
to support what you just said about having a diverse population, yeah, he ranged all the way from people in labor, the average white guy in labor, all the way to Latino people who were working for Chavez and the workers' movement,
mhm,
all the way to African Americans. He had the support from, and the anti-war movement was a huge boost to him.
right. So this guy could have actually been one of the most dangerous presidents we ever had to the establishment, okay, if he had been allowed to succeed. But coincidentally,
He was
he
assassinated
was,
after he won the primary,
right, assassinated on the campaign trail by another lone nut.
supposedly.
Allegedly, yeah.
So
But
we've been told.
so we have a pattern emerging, though, is that anybody who's actually dangerous to the military-industrial complex, the intelligence people, the COINTELPRO individuals, the people that are involved in domestic influence, if you're dangerous to them, you seem to end up with a head wound.
Then anyway, in those 5.5 years, yeah, that seemed to have been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but let's again go back to documentation. I mean, these conclusions are all valid, but let's look at the documentation that might actually support that.
Well, an interesting thing too is that this West Berlin speech that Kennedy was going to be invited for, he would be replacing Dr. King because
Right.
King had been assassinated the week before.
Right. And at that time, that was a big deal. Americans speaking on foreign soil, saying anything that resembled dissent. This was a big, huge, bell ringing event as far as, domestic surveillance, domestic intelligence was concerned.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I think also it was the place where JFK had spoken and gotten such a great reception.
Right. Ich bin ein Berliner, that whole deal, yeah.
So I think that also plays into why they would be interested in this specific appearance. But the appearances go on. I mean, I have files that talk about J. Edgar Hoover having him tracked when he was Attorney General. When he was his boss, he was tracking him.
Right. Well, and of course, it's not as though Hoover stopped there. I mean, his main boss at the Department of Justice, of course, would have been Bobby Kennedy, but he wasn't beyond, taking a look at the President of the United States,
Oh
who should be
no,
his boss as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
the vice president, everyone. From some of the files I've seen, Hoover, we don't know exactly what was destroyed from Gandhi's office,
Right.
but what we do still have is incriminating enough. I mean, we've still got some COINTELPRO files. We've got all of the illegal surveillance that he was doing for decades, and he was doing it on members of Congress. He was doing it on presidents. There was a reason why no one really messed with Hoover until he died.
Right. There absolutely was. So go ahead a little forward. I'm going to bring Dylan Wade into the conversation, but
Okay.
Dylan, just hang back a little bit because I want Carmine to get through some evidence, and then I'm going to ask for open phone calls. But if you could just hang back for a minute and let us go through a little more of the RFK evidence before we get to you, okay?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to listen live through Skype.
Oh, okay, no problem. Just if you can, mute up and hang out, and when I ask for calls, chime in, okay?
All right.
And by the way, I will be trying to take some calls toward the end here at 718-717-8296. You can have that number ready, and when I call for calls, dial it. I'll announce it again. Or if you're on my Skype list, I'll add you in just like I did Dylan just now. So go ahead, Carmine.
Okay, and then just the final thing I wanted to mention from this document was this was the annual May Day rally that was occurring in Berlin. It was a long-time tradition, and it takes place in a large field in front of the restored Reichstag building, which is immediately adjacent to the sector border between East and West Berlin near the Brandenburg Gate.
Right, which was a flashpoint for the Cold War. This was a huge issue constantly. I mean, we nearly came to blows with the Soviet Union several times because of maneuvers and things in that area. You're talking about a hot zone regarding the Cold War. I know that sounds funny, but it's apropos, no?
And it all ended there, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That was basically, I still think it's still been going, of course, but the public Cold War ended then.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So what else do we have in the way of, like, say, hard evidence?
This is, this one, pardon me. It's again about Robert F. Kennedy, and in him being in California. Yes, this is where they try to lay out the motive for Sirhan.
Oh, Sirhan Bashir Sirhan's motive.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And, because here's the thing. This guy claimed immediately afterwards that he had no recollection of the shooting, et cetera, et cetera. He allegedly got off 8 shots in that pantry, wounded other people that were bystanders. I forget the exact number, but, we could go over the things about...
I think it was 5.
Yeah, I do believe you're right altogether. Kennedy was clearly at least hit twice, once in the head. Depending on how you measure trajectories and things like that, we could argue about whether the jacket was struck and the body wasn't at one point and everything else. But nevertheless, this guy supposedly, scores the headshot on Bobby Kennedy to the back of his ear, despite not really getting within, 6 feet of him. And leaving stifling marks on his ear and everything else. See Thomas Noguchi about the shooting itself and all of the adventures he got himself involved in due to the fact that he wanted to make that statement and was eminently qualified to do so. But sorry, Carmine, I digress.
That's fine. Yeah, officials once again tried to suppress evidence.
Right, and here it is: the motive of Sirhan. Go ahead.
Well, this is where I think it began, because this is June 18th, so this is not that far after the assassination, long before the trial was on its way.
Right, so within a reasonable time for initial investigation. Yeah.
This is where the FBI creates what I like to call another link between the assassins. This would be between Sirhan and Oswald, a veneer for him, a terrorist veneer.
Mm-hmm.
Because Oswald had his supposed Marxist and communist veneer that we can show what there wasn't much evidence for. Now, in this document, they say that it was learned from sources in Los Angeles, they never named them, that Sirhan was in school in the Jordanian or Arab section of Palestine, and because of this fact was subjected to Arab propaganda, which no doubt was the motive which preempted his assassination of Robert Kennedy. Now, here's the problem. He left when he was, I believe, 4.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the difficulty here. He was like 4 years old or whatever. I mean, let's just say we're talking about a kindergarten kid. I'm sure he's been fully radicalized by that time, Carmine.
Which is utterly ridiculous. And then when you look in the trial transcripts, Sirhan at one point, because apparently he's just been told so many times he's guilty, says, I murdered Robert Kennedy with 20 years of forethought. Once again, makes him 4.
Right.
He didn't even know about Robert Kennedy when he was 4.
Yeah, how could he have? You know, Bobby Kennedy himself was, well, not completely unknown, but what would we have known him as at that point? Well, he would have been the son of Ambassador Kennedy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, give me a break.
Exactly. It's all founded upon sand once again. You know,
Yeah.
they made this assumption because it was easy to try to link him to that area. And then when you look into more of the evidence, too, it's revealed that even that's ridiculous because he came over from missionaries, so he was Christian. And he looked into the Rosicrucians, so he was into the occult. He was never a terrorist. He was never a believer in Islam. He didn't go to mosques.
Right. He was. They were Christian. The Sirhan family is Christian.
Yeah.
You know, there are Christians that come from the Middle East, by the way, for the listener who doesn't know. You know, there are Christians. And so they couldn't quite, you know, ascribe the, you know, the Arab Muslim thing to them, but they tried.
Yeah. Oh, they did. And a lot of people believed it, and a lot of people still do. What was that? There's one book, you know, that I will not read, but I've heard about it, and I thought the title was hilarious, The Last Terrorist, and it's a book about Sirhan.
Oh, I think it was the first.
Oh, the first terrorist? Okay.
Yeah, didn't they call him the first Middle Eastern terrorist?
Yeah, there was some book that came out that called him the first or the last terrorist, and he wasn't.
No.
You know?
He wasn't a terrorist, and even if you assume that he was the lone shooter, you know, the motive has never been established for that. You know,
the ballistics totally rule that out.
Well, that's the other problem, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, I mean, you got 3 shots from the back, and Sirhan was no closer than 2 feet at most, based on any witness testimony. No one ever put him close enough to make the shots.
Yeah. Well, if you take a look at Turncoat Melanson. Excuse me, Philip Melanson, you can find that that he states that, well, you know, if Bobby had twisted on his way down, he might have actually gotten shot.
Well, that's a problem because Carl Euchre already had him in a half Nelson.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. Plus, he winds up falling backwards. So after he's shot in the head, he does the twist the other way, you know. So I guess Bobby was a fan of Chubby Checker.
And once again, it's like the grassy knoll. It's ruling out all the witnesses in the area who said something different than what officials want to conclude.
Yeah, right.
Which is the majority in this case. Unlike the grassy knoll, where they have more witnesses recorded anyway for the school book depository, in this case, most of the witnesses don't support Sirhan making the shots.
Yeah, it's chaos. I mean, he had a gun in his hand. This you can establish through the witnesses. There were shots that went, you know, astray. The whole thing happened rather quickly and all of that. But you don't have a moving car here. You have a tight space.
Yeah.
You know, where, I'm sorry, I find this to be so much more a case of the official story cannot work. Then I think it's actually worse than either of the other 2 of the 3-letter assassinations.
Like I said, they get worse as they go on.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. So, what else do you find fascinating about this, though, from the documentation?
Well, I have read Noguchi's coroner's report, and based on that, I mean, he talks about the 3 wounds that were inflicted from the rear were 2 to the back, and then 1 in the back of the head. I think 1 was closer to the shoulder, of course. There was a lower wound, and then the 3rd one in the back of the head, and then 1 frontal wound, which could have been from Sirhan, that struck the shoulder pad.
Right, that's what I was talking about when I said you could see that, you know, there's a possibility that a bullet could have passed through the suit and not hit the body. That's what I'm talking about.
That's the one shot he could have gotten off without without any of us having a right to argue about it.
Right, and there you go. You know, and meanwhile we have the recording. You know,
the Brzezinski tape.
If you want to talk about that briefly and explain to people what that is.
Sure. Basically, it was there was a Polish reporter named Stanislaw Przynski, who was present recording what was going on, and he didn't turn off his recorder, so he accidentally recorded the assassination. Now, the Przynski tape was basically locked up in a government archive and left there until I believe it was 2004 or 2005.
Right.
And then the tape was turned over to researchers. It was, I think, second or third, maybe fourth generation copy, but it was in government hands the whole time. So the only people that could have altered it would be the government.
Right. It was immediately captured in that sweep for evidence.
Yep.
And was never held by researchers or anything like that. You don't have, which unfortunately is the situation with the DPD recording.
Yeah.
That was handled by so many people, you don't know who could have done what to it. But in this case, it's consistently in the hands of the government, so...
And they authenticated it.
And they authenticated as well, which, I bet you somebody got reamed for doing that.
Somebody got cut pay for doing that.
Right.
Well, as you know, sometimes they don't pay attention to the folders and they just scan anything and put it online.
That does happen. That does happen. And interestingly enough, too, I mean, if you, and people say, well, the science of acoustics is unproven and all that. Well, if that's the case, then our tanks would not operate as they do. And if you don't believe me, check out how modern tanks operate and exactly, what type of sound is utilized and all this kind of stuff for location of objects and obstacles. And if you don't buy that, well, check this out. The Kent State shooting? Well, an analysis was done of that as well, an acoustical analysis, which nailed down the case, basically. Okay. Yeah. So they know from where the shot came from, what type of rifle it was, and everything from acoustical analysis.
Well, and people should realize that modern science has continued after these cases. So just because it's an original piece of evidence doesn't mean it's never subject to new scientific scrutiny.
That's true.
Sometimes things are going to change both for and against conspiracy, but when they change, you can't just ignore them. You can't just go with the old evidence. I've gotten into this argument, too. You always have to account for new evidence being introduced.
Yeah, I tend to say that it is good to reference the original scientific conclusion. It is good to see exactly how well-founded it was. And then it is good to look at the updated versions. Mm-hmm. Just like with fingerprint analysis, we find that the computer does it a lot faster and better than the human eye does.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's designed to do. We find that techniques have changed a little bit because they discovered that some of them weren't quite as reliable as they appeared to be. So when you take modern technology and you apply it to the old evidence, now the counter to that, of course, is when you look at stuff like photographs and people talk about the pixelation of chemically made photographs.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I try analyzing a chemically made photograph properly. If you break it down into pixels, you're examining the digital representation of the original document. Hello, photocopy.
Yeah, people are looking at copies of copies and thinking that they have the answers.
Yeah, right. So.
Moving back along, I'm sorry, what was the last thing? We started talking about something else as always.
Yeah, right. Well, we were talking about what the problems are here. I mean, look, there's plenty of documentation. I mean, do you have another silver bullet point, or should we move along to conclusion and open up the floor?
I think we can open up the floor. We've done 5. All I would say is that, if you want to touch back on these again, I'm more than willing to bring some others. One of my favorite topics that we didn't really get a chance to cover is Dwayne Wolfer. I love that guy. He is the Keystone Cops of the LAPD.
Well, go ahead. Explain who he is and why you say that.
Dwayne Wolfer was the criminologist responsible for maintaining the files and the forensic evidence on the Special Unit Senator and for the RFK case.
Right.
And he made the mess that the DPD made look like a well-run case.
Yeah. Well, they learned there. And, of course, you have...
Do that?
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And I mean, clearly intimidating witnesses, clearly discounting other accounts, destroying evidence directly. I mean, taking evidence into your hands, admitting that it has been actually handed along the chain of custody to a particular location, and then basically saying, gee, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, just forgetting. I can't remember exactly. I think I used 8 or 9 different adjectives for the word forget in my book when I describe Wolfer.
Right.
Because I go through and talk about just how many. I mean, it wasn't just he lost some files. He lost tons of files. He lost testing results. He lost exhibits. He lost sealing time. He lost everything.
Yeah,
the man couldn't remember a test he ran.
Yeah, physical evidence to the test results, to the witness statements, to tape recordings, to seized photographs, to... It is endless, the amount of evidence that just disappeared under this guy's watch. So one of two things is absolutely necessary to conclude about this gentleman, is either that he was one of the most inept human beings ever to be placed in charge of anything, or he's actively making sure that the evidence is not so, textured or real. Okay? One way or another.
Or both.
You know what? I stand corrected, Carmine. Both are very possible.
I'd lose everything. I don't think I could lose that much.
Well, it's amazing when you look at it, because it's like one of the things when they ask him later. I think it's at the 1975 hearing when the L.A. Council had a hearing, and they asked him for or I'm sorry, the Commissioners Council. It was they wanted to see some of his tests, and he didn't remember doing them.
Right.
How do you forget that you went with Noguchi to a firing area and shot off bullets and did tests?
Yeah, I mean, in the most important and most infamous case you will have ever handled in your life, you're gonna go and test fire the weapon that is allegedly used by the lone nut assassin to see if you can prove that that's actually the weapon that did the shooting, and you can't remember doing it.
Yeah,
that's
and the gun numbers didn't match in the court. It goes from something that small that they tried to attribute to a clerical error all the way up to bullets vanishing and getting mixed up with the test bullets.
Yeah, right. And at one point there were 2 guns, in custody, and one of them disappears. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and the local authorities also got reprimanded by the LA City Council for screwing up all of the. It was the LA. I can't remember. One of the divisions of the police department basically was reprimanded because they just let all these exhibits get taken out by people. No one knew who was taking them out. No one had recorded what had happened to them. The gun wasn't the same as when they first got it.
Right. That's the thing. But it was Sirhan though.
You've got that weak motive that is impossible because he was 4.
You've got a weak motive, you've got physical impossibilities and inconsistencies, you've got evidence disappearing, you've got corrupt individuals, people with alternate agendas.
You've got one other armed man in the exact position behind Robert Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, let's not forget about Thane Eugene Caesar.
Now, I don't know if he moved back, but the last time I checked, he was in the Philippines, which is not extraditable.
Yeah, as far as I know, he remained there, and I don't even know if he's still alive.
I'd love to do an interview with him.
Oh, sounds like the most bungled case in history.
Almost.
Yeah, I don't know. This one gives it a run for its money. This might be JFK as far as bad, methods.
Yeah, actually, it does. Like I said, it is the most clear indication of the official story being full of holes.
Yeah.
Way more than JFK. And meanwhile, I didn't spend the time. I didn't have to. I looked at it and I went, "You're kidding."
Yeah.
I mean, just every turn, there's nothing right. I mean, at least with the DPD, I mean, there's a few things that are actually, okay, this is consistent with the witnesses. This is consistent with... But this thing is like...
And even his lawyers. I mean, as we're raised lawyers, obviously we're trying to benefit. I think, once again, there might have been conflict of interest with Cooper, because Cooper, at the same time he was running Sirhan's trial, is also under indictment for the Johnny Roselli case with the Friars Club that he had used illegal documents with.
Yep.
It's always, there's a gun on the lawyer every time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And Oswald didn't even get legal representation.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, at least they got one. They got bad ones, but at least they got something.
Yeah. Even somebody from the Dallas Bar Association went down to try and see if Oswald could use some help. He sort of went down there and went, "Does he need a lawyer? No? Okay, bye."
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they wanted to
somebody gave it a shot.
Yeah. I'm sure the DPD was like, well, yeah, hang on one sec, guys, leave him alone. Okay, bring the lawyer back. Yeah, no, that wasn't going to happen either.
No.
No, and you would have had people screaming if he got a lawyer.
Well, he was, Dylan, but in all fairness, he was on television. Every time he got a microphone anywhere near him, he kept saying, "I'm not being allowed legal representation."
Oh,
yeah, but people would have been even more pissed if he got it.
Well, but it doesn't matter. Who cares what they think? The law's the law. You should have got a lawyer.
Right.
Absolutely.
If I get taken into custody right now because I knocked over a telephone pole in my neighborhood, okay, and I say the word lawyer, everything is supposed to stop.
Exactly.
And
I agree.
Must be found.
Well, and the excuse that I often hear is, well, the Miranda rights weren't written. Well, that's nice. Sorry, the 14th and 16th Amendments were.
Yeah, exactly.
And under those, you have due process.
Yeah, right. And where's the due process? That's why I do believe the reports and the accounts of, you've been indicted basically for the shooting of a policeman, and then they bring him down at 1:30 in the morning. They haul a judge in there to say, okay.
Because, justice, that's the time when justice happens, at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, why not? It's the time the Federal Reserve got brought in.
Nice. Nice. A whole other issue. But anyway, okay, now I'm going to...
Sorry.
I'll go to your conclusion quickly, and then we'll try and see if we can get some phone calls and hear from Dylan really what he wants to add in on this, okay?
Okay.
So
sorry.
Let's go this way. After looking at it and seeing the idea that Sirhan Bashir Sirhan is the lone assassin, this is the story. We investigated it. We investigated it more thoroughly than anything, any of these other political cases, and we had a special unit devised to do it and everything else. What do you conclude?
I would contend they're wrong. I would contend that there are, once again, much like the JFK and MLK cases, huge swaths of possibilities that were not investigated. There was a lot of agendas in Special Unit Senator. Once again, they wanted to cover any mistakes they had made. They wholesale destroyed thousands of pieces of evidence, whether it was pictures, woodwork, ceiling tiles, exhibits, documents.
Mm-hmm. Tapes missing,
Yep. The intimidation that occurred. I'm not a huge believer in Sandra Serrano, for instance. Sandra Serrano and the polka dot dress girl. I think that is kind of a black hole as far as the case goes. It's possible some of the things people try to attribute to it, but unless we can identify someone, and because Serrano changed her statement 3 times, kind of like Howard Brennan did, she's not the most consistent witness.
No, but listening to the tape of Hernandez going after her.
Oh, yeah, no, they definitely wanted everyone to shut up.
Oh, yeah, right away. So regardless of what she was saying was correct or not or whatever, or she was flip-flopping or she was upset, or it doesn't really matter because you can listen to him going, listen, this is not what you saw, but I saw this, but this isn't what you saw.
Guess what happened to Hernandez?
Yeah.
Did you ever read about what happened to him in the future?
Oh, well, he winds up going to Central America.
Indeed, but I mean, because he passed away, I believe. Oh, he didn't pass away, or I think he might have retired. But I saw an article about him a couple years ago. He was the CEO of a very rich company that did security. Mm-hmm.
No, he was a security specialist already by the time he was doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because he had the training down in Central America.
Yeah. So, and I know that
how do you have a career? Sorry.
No, it's okay. I know that he returned from the Central American adventures to do this, but also he went back there later. and had a whole really interesting story arc to the end of his days there. Again, this is a guy who I'm not even sure if he's alive or not anymore. I'm not sure, but regardless, here's another guy though that was working in security, had special training and agency involvement in some way or another.
Well, and Hernandez is actually less than the one that I think had more direct connections to the agency, which was Pina.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But we don't have a tape of him browbeating a witness, so
But what, you'll have to remind me to send you documents, because I do have documents about him. One of which is he left the LAPD, I believe, was 3 or 4 months before the assassination. Mm-hmm. Or actually, he had left six or 7 months. He came back 3 or 4 months, but he had left 6 or 7 months to go get training from AID, the Agency for International Development.
Right.
Which I have other documents that show that was a front for the CIA.
Well, what a coincidence.
And another person who worked for the AID was David Morales when he was at JM Wave.
Mm-hmm. Although I've got to say that I do not believe in the CIA guys caught on video. Mr. O'Sullivan.
No, I think Sean had some good ideas, and I think that some of his research is valuable. I just don't think that those are those guys.
No, I think that they are actually what the official story claims them to be, which is, people from the watch company and all that. Yeah. So, now that we've gone through both of these assassinations sort of in lightning round speed a bit, and sorry if I cut off anything on you, Carmine,
no problem.
But I think we've come up with a pretty concise explanation for things and added documentation to it. Okay? Now, if you want to join in and you want to call in, it's fine. 718-717-8296. I will take your calls, and,
as long as they're not blocked.
As long as they're not blocked, again. And if you want to join me on the Skype, all you got to do is be on the Charles.Ochelli Skype list, and I will add you into the call, and you can ask a question of either myself or Carmine, or just simply add your thoughts to tonight's discussion, whatever it is you want to do. So, Dylan.
Hi.
You had Carmine on your show yesterday, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you guys discuss JFK, or did you discuss this stuff?
JFK. We're going to be doing another show to discuss a bunch of other stuff.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And I plan to do that with Carmine in the future as well. And Carmine, be prepared. Some other people might actually try to grab you as a guest as well, because that happens when certain people are on my show. And not just with Dylan, but with others.
Really?
Yeah, there are others that get guests from me as well. And you know who you are, because I know you're listening. Okay. Moving on. What do you think about this stuff? I mean, did you listen to the whole thing about Martin Luther King, or did you listen to the whole RFK discussion?
I got in when you guys started on RFK.
Okay. So what are your thoughts?
Probably the most botched case I've ever looked at, I've ever heard anybody talk about. It's easily the most botched.
Hmm.
How do you screw so many things up so consistently?
Well, and that is an interesting point. I mean, in a lot of cases, again, I like to err on the side of ineptitude when it comes to certain things, but man, when you see the disaster that was made of this case, it's just, I have a hard time buying the idea that, these guys, it's like you want to walk up to them and say, look, man, who ties your shoes? Because there is no way that you can do this and possibly have a career in investigative work, file clerking, and anything. It's almost an impossibility. Is it an impossibility because, bureaucrats are, efficient individuals and all that stuff? Look, anything is possible when it comes to ineptitude, but this seems so disastrous, so ridiculous, so far-fetched, is in complete opposition to the physical evidence, is in complete opposition to mostly any expert who has come into it without an agenda, with no dog in the fight.
And contrary to his own.
Well, contrary to whose own?
The investigator's own research. He said he did tests and he didn't even include them, or he went against them.
Well, that's the fascinating part, is that he's sitting there actively participating in Thomas Noguchi's, firearms test of the Iber Johnson revolver, right? Which shows that when they try it out, they find out that, look, this one shot, the headshot, had to have emanated from a muzzle distance of 2 inches from the head. Now, that narrows down who has access to 2 inches within 2 inches of the tip of his right ear. So really, you're talking about a gun that's next to his head. Now, if you can't put Sirhan's gun next to Kennedy's head, you have either another shooter, okay, or actually, no, you have another shooter. End of story. I was going to try and be generous, but I can't. If you put it there and you can't put Sirhan's muzzle within that distance to the back of his ear, guess what? Another shooter. Bottom line. And you don't have that kind of clarity with JFK, because the autopsy is disgusting. It's not filled out properly. It's been destroyed at least once. It's the notes are destroyed. There's all kinds of weird sort of entries into it. A guy who's had his brains blown out has a heavier brain than a normal adult male's. You have all kinds of weird things going on.
The follow-up exam, the portable X-ray machine, the people on the phone, the over 20 people in the room.
Yeah, all of this disaster during the autopsy. You don't have that with RFK, and you have an autopsy which, looks like it's pretty clean, looks like it was conducted with some good scientific methods, looks like it was conducted by a competent individual.
And that looks like it's why it didn't agree with the official conclusions.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got way less of a, you could blame the JFK, the autopsy doesn't match. Well, that's because they were inept. They screwed things up. Okay, I buy it. Now, you go look at RFK, you can't even begin to make that argument.
Yeah, Noguchi was far too comprehensive in what he did.
He was meticulous.
And he won that's another thing a lot of people's end note to the Noguchi matter is they went after him. They tried to say that he was on drugs, that he was trying to get publicity from the case. His superiors tried to have him fired, and he took them to court and he won.
Right.
He proved that he had done it correctly and that they were actually trying to indict him for the very good things that they had praised him for in other cases.
Right. And the funny thing, again, is that, a competent individual who goes to try and speak the truth winds up not being able to do it during the trial and everything else, and being, smeared and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, later on,
he becomes the coroner.
Yeah, and he's reinstated, gets his job back, and then becomes the coroner, for Los Angeles County. So,
yeah.
Did he ever speak out about the official conclusions?
I don't think after that.
Not much after that. I mean, he has on occasion shown up here or there at conferences, things like that. But you can readily find film of him explaining what his conclusions are. And, with
on Facebook, I never wanted to bother him.
Yeah, right.
I thought about it.
You know what? He would be somebody I'd be willing to try and bother a little bit, just to say, I would love to just let you tell your story. You know what I mean?
That'd be one I'd definitely tune in.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear, I have the coroner from the Kennedy assassination, RFK.
That would be somebody I'd be willing to bother quite a bit.
Well, take it easy on him. He did some good work.
Yeah, really. This is one of the good guys, so, let's not pester him.
Just enough to see if I could get him on.
Right. So I see nobody else is trying to join in here. That's okay. We can fill the time anyway.
It's that or 8 block calls. I'll take that.
Right. Right.
I also had, if you want, I wanted to go back because I had a little thing to tell you about one of the documents that I have with the Arlington issue, that when RFK was laid to rest, if you notice, RFK wasn't put in Arlington until the Nixon administration. Mm-hmm. Because LBJ never signed the order. So even after he was dead, LBJ would not grant him that.
Well, right, because there was animosity between the two, which I absolutely believe.
Oh, yeah.
Those that say that there was, this conversation in public, why did you kill my brother, and all this other stuff.
That's ridiculous.
That's ridiculous stuff. They were at odds the entire time anyway. LBJ just being who he was and Bobby Kennedy just being who he was, kind of predictable that was going to happen.
Well, like I told you, I'm usually all about the files, but early on I read some of the books of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
And one I would recommend is called Mutual Contempt. And it's a book about LBJ and RFK's history together, how they met, where when he met Johnson, he met him out at his ranch, and Johnson made 3 promises to him that RFK and those who support him claim that Johnson broke later. And one was that he wouldn't try to obstruct Kennedy's run, that he wouldn't try to push Adlai Stevenson to try to negate Kennedy's voters, and that he would go along with basically the Kennedy agenda. And eventually Johnson broke all 3 of them. But I think what started the real animosity between them is that Johnson got him to go hunting with him. And apparently Johnson gave him a gun that had quite a kick. So when RFK fired the shotgun, he was thrown to the ground. And Johnson said, you got to learn how to hold that gun like a man.
Right. Because
so just stuff like that. As where, Johnson is the classic tough guy, Southern cowboy, or at least that's what he wanted to be. And RFK is the Eastern intellectual. It's not it's an odd couple to say the least.
Well, right. That's why I said it's not outside of the realm of possibility that these two just had a serious problem with each other, being that they were 2 very, very different men. Regardless of what his view was on the JFK presidency or whether, blah, 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 blah. This is not a piece of evidence that is really remarkable that these 2 were at odds with one another. It's kind of a natural thing, Yeah,
and my thing is that I think it also goes into the debunking that we were doing in the last Myth show about trying to blame LBJ. If Robert Kennedy believed that Lyndon Johnson had his brother killed, he wouldn't have stayed on the administration.
Well, and then there are people that argue that, he did learn later that that's what the case was, and he did leave shortly thereafter and thing. Look, I understand how that looks, but let's face the facts. This guy was literally devastated. He had spent a good portion of his life working in the service of furthering his brother's political aspirations.
Which were really his father's.
Which were truly his father's. It was a family affair, absolutely. Joe Kennedy wanted to be the first Irish president, and screwed the pooch, basically, regarding his stance on Adolf Hitler.
Yep.
Okay? That's what happened. And was that a love for Hitler or something like that? Probably not. It was a political stance that Joseph Kennedy, in his miscalculated, hubris, believed that this was the best course of action.
It was his Dukakis tank video.
There you go. Very nice. I like how you put that one. And do a search engine and see what you get. Dukakis tank video. Nice. Oh. So,
is John Kerry I'm reporting for duty video.
Yeah, there you go. So look, we've got about 6 minutes left, and I want to thank Carmine for coming on tonight. And of course, I'm going to give him sort of the final word as we just get ready to get out of here. Like I said, 5-6 minutes left. And the bottom line is, I want to thank everybody who tuned in, whether you decide to use your TuneIn application or you went to ucy.tv/TOE. I appreciate it. Anybody who, follows this stuff and hears us further down line on YouTube, I do believe I will make an exception and place this one on the Blind JFK Researcher channel as well, because usually I only put JFK-related things there. But hey, it did come up in conversation, so fair.
Yep.
And besides that, I want to, give as many places for people to find what it is that Carmine is doing.
I appreciate that, Chuck. Thank you.
As possible. It'll be available on the network's YouTube channel. And, of course, if you do go to ucy.tv/TOE, the MP3 archives, the RSS feed are available there. There is also a donate button, for me and also for the network. But just a side note, if you make a donation to me, a piece of that does go to the network. I do that voluntarily. That's not something that's forced on me. That's what I do because I respect the platform that I'm on. Okay, so if you do feel like making a donation through PayPal, you can donate to me or to the network. Either way, I'm happy to hear both. If you do it just to the network, though, I'd love it if you told them that you did it because you heard this show. Anyway, all of that aside, self-promotion, everything else, the Ochelli Effect, this is what we did on a Thursday night, and I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And as usual, I will give my guests sort of the last big thought of the night and shut my mouth for once and try and let them finish. But again, thanks, Carmine, for doing this stuff with me. Not only does JFK Myth shows, but we're going to do a lot of different work and create an archive of stuff that I know is part of what I'm proud of doing on this show and part of what it is that I'm proud about putting out over the years. You're definitely part of it, and I appreciate you. And also, there are personal reasons why I need to thank you. And eventually, when I do a show about that little investigation and what's going to come of it,
Yep.
You're gonna have to make an appearance. Okay.
That's great. I'd be more than happy.
Anyway, so again, I'm going to give Carmine the last big thought of the night, and sorry we didn't get more calls and things, but who knows? You know, maybe they got their questions answered.
Let's hope. I just want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity, and I want to, of course, say, please, if you get a chance, check out tpaak.com, tpaak.com. That's the book website where you can also find the blog that I've had for a couple years now with over 40 different articles, over 400 pieces of evidence. You can also have a look at our recommended section and descriptions about the book. We also have a promotional video. I would ask you to check out Debunked Blog, which is a debunkblog.com. It is a WordPress site of my friends and co-researchers, Zachary Gendro and Trish Fleming. And I would also direct you to the Lone Gunman, pardon me, the Lone Gunman podcast with Rob Clark. You can Google that, find that on Spreaker, Weebly, and a few other platforms. Also, check out Chuck's YouTube channel, The Blind JFK Researcher, and the Neapolis Media Group YouTube channel, which you can also find. We also both have Google Plus accounts. We'd love for you to come out and say hello, maybe make a comment on some of the articles we put out, and I'll be happy to see everyone again when Chuck decides to have me on. Thank you.
And we may very well have to do JFK Myths Part 3 next week, depending on circumstances.
Hey, that'll be fine with me. Sounds good. We bring them on.
I'm thinking we might have to hit it again on a Saturday night, because I enjoyed doing it at that time of day.
Yeah.
And it seemed as though I had more live listeners on Saturdays still. So I'm way more happy to do it for more and more people, because the more we knock away the mythology, although, believe it, we're going to have to do a couple of shows, I think, just knocking and beating up on the official conclusions.
Oh, the grand myth, the biggest of them all.
The biggest of them all. I am saving that one. So for those that think I'm only attacking other conspiracy theorists, no, I'm attacking poorly founded fairy tales and theories and assumptions.
Well, and both sides have them, you know? I mean, the officials have their own set of bad ideas.
Right. We're really just, so far, we have only hit the low-hanging fruit, my friends.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So don't worry. We will get to the Warren Commission in and of itself and other official investigations and pronouncements regarding JFK as well. But Carmine, yeah, absolutely a pleasure. And also, if you go to the Ochelli Effect radio show group on Facebook, Carmine is the other admin there now. So he's helping me police that up a little bit, much to the dismay of some people.
Come on, Chuck, we want them to come to the page.
You know, I need a little help now and then. And plus I made you an admin on the Ochelli Effect page, the entity page too, right?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I believe you did, yeah.
Yeah, so that puts you in a weird group, but a lot of news, a lot of interesting stuff, historical research, everything that comes out there. So if you do the Facebook thing, you can find the Ochelli Effect on Facebook as well. And your page for your media group, I always forget how to find it and everything.
For Facebook, it's facebook.com/NEAP, capital NEAP, capital MG at the end. So facebook.com/NEAPMG.
NEAPMG, that's what I was trying to type in earlier and couldn't find, but I finally took the
As
link.
soon as you get Neep, basically, I'm the only one on there, so you usually there's not many other Neapolises out there.
Yeah, well, there is a couple of Neapolises though. That's the strange thing.
Well, I know there's Ohio, the city. That's the only other one I know of.
Yeah, but there's this other there's another media group.
Okay.
Yeah, believe it or not, and it's like a little bit. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
It's a completely different thing.
Okay,
so.
I'm the one with the old castle. You'll see a castle from Naples.
That's it. That's it. That's how you can tell them apart. That other one with